My name is Rupali. I got married into a family where many people lived, but no one was ever ready to stand up for each other. Everyone was just concerned with themselves and minded their own business. My father-in-law also lived with us. My mother-in-law felt as dear to me as my own mother because my mother had passed away. So, I saw my mother in her, and I treated her the same way I would have treated my own mother. But one day, my father-in-law did something to my mother-in-law that made my hair stand on end. My father had passed away many years ago. I was the only sister of 7 brothers, and none of them were married yet because I was the oldest and all my brothers were younger than me. I was the eldest and the first child of my parents. My father always gave importance to his sons. He never valued me. I was just caught up in household chores because all my brothers went to work, and the 2 youngest ones stayed at home. I had to cook for so many people. I was getting older, but my father never thought about getting me married. When he wanted to marry off my younger brother, the relatives would say, "Get your daughter married first." My father would say he didn't have the money for a dowry for his daughter. He believed that a daughter-in-law would come for free and even bring a dowry along. This thought troubled me a lot. Gradually I grew older. After some time, my sister-in-law came into the family and made my life miserable. She didn't lift a finger to do any housework. I had to do everything. I was even more troubled because my sister-in-law should have been helping, but she did nothing. The family thought that with my sister-in-law around, I would get some rest, but the truth was that my problems only increased. I miss my mother a lot because after her death, the entire responsibility of the house fell on my shoulders. I was also very concerned about my brothers, but then I convinced myself that since no one in this house cared about me, I shouldn't care about anyone either. I was 35 years old, and all the girls my age were married with 2 or 3 children. My uncle explained to my father that I should be married first. My father was very old, but he never paid attention to his children. He only cared about making money, and the money was only for him and his sons. I had to live like a servant in this house. Finally, at the insistence of my uncle and grandfather, my father agreed to get me married. The proposal was also brought by my uncle. I was happy that I was finally getting married and would be free from this house. But I always wished to marry into a small family. When I saw the boy and learned about his family, my heart broke. The boy I was supposed to marry was very dark-skinned, and his family was as large as mine. He had 6 brothers and 2 sisters. The sisters were married, and all the brothers lived in different cities with their wives. The boy lived with his parents. He earned a lot and his house was very big. My uncle brought this proposal because my father had no intention of getting me married, and I was getting older. So my father agreed to this match. The main reason for agreeing was that the boy's family didn't want a dowry because they already had everything. The boy's mother came and put a gold ring on my finger. I was happy that I was finally getting married and that my husband was wealthy. Looks don't matter as long as a person earns well. I wanted a husband who would respect me and love me. With this hope I married the boy. My in-laws' house was far from ours. Neither my brothers nor my father had gone to see the boy's house. They were just fulfilling the formalities and sending me off. But I trusted my uncle because he was the one who had arranged my marriage. Unfortunately, my trust was misplaced. When I arrived at my in-laws' house, I saw that my husband's house was huge and that he was very dark-skinned. But all the family members lived in that house. In the first few days after the wedding, I thought they were guests and would leave after the ceremony. But they all stayed and no one mentioned leaving. Besides my husband, there were his 6 brothers and their wives. They also had many children. The first few days with my husband were very good. But after a few days, he left for the city for work. My mother-in-law was a very kind woman and took care of me. My sisters-in-law stayed in their rooms. They were too busy resting and doing makeup to do anything else. I only had 2 or 3 days of rest, and then I took on all the responsibilities of the house. We had servants, but I didn't trust them, so I felt it was my duty to keep an eye on them. My mother-in-law was very pleased with my sense of responsibility. Despite so many people living in the house, there was an eerie silence. Everyone stayed in their rooms. Since my husband had gone to the city, I had to sleep alone in my room. My husband's behavior was very kind, and from the first night, he treated me well. I was relieved to find that my husband was good because his dark complexion had delayed his marriage for a long time. When I would go to bed at night, alone in my room, it felt like someone was screaming and shouting. I thought there might be a ghost in the house because I could also hear footsteps. During the day, everyone stayed locked in their rooms, so who was walking around at night? I was very scared and kept thinking about my husband. Every night, I would hear someone walking and shouting. I would stay locked in my room in fear, thinking I would definitely ask someone about what was happening in the house at night. The next day, I asked my mother-in-law about it, and she became a little nervous and tried to dismiss it. This house was very big, and many people lived in it. Maybe someone woke up at night, or perhaps one of the sisters-in-law's children was crying, and I thought someone was shouting. Maybe it was just my imagination. I convinced myself not to pay attention to it since no one was harming me anyway. The silence in this house made me very bored. Sometimes I would talk to my husband on the phone. Other than that, I had nowhere to go. No relatives from my in-laws' side ever visited. Everyone just minded their own business. One night as I was sleeping again, I heard someone screaming loudly. I gathered the courage to get up and see who was shouting so late at night and walking around the house. I saw that my father-in-law was yelling on the phone with someone. He often spoke loudly on the phone, and his voice would echo throughout the house. He was always angry over small things, picking fights, doing whatever he wanted, and spending long hours on the phone because he didn't work and stayed at home. Everyone in the house was very afraid of him, even my mother-in-law. My father-in-law's behavior was bad with everyone. He never listened to anyone and always did things his own way. Days passed like this. Every night, I would see that the person walking around late at night was none other than my father-in-law. He would talk to someone late at night, and I thought it was someone screaming. I was also very scared because sometimes he would hit my mother-in-law. A few days later, my husband came home for 2 or 3 days. I was very happy that he was back. But what surprised me was that when my husband was home, my father-in-law wouldn't lay a hand on my mother-in-law. The atmosphere of the house would change. Everyone would eat together at the dining table and spend time with each other. One day my husband said, "Get dressed nicely, we're going out." I was thrilled. My husband took me to a big restaurant for dinner. There he asked me, "What's wrong? You don't seem to be in a good mood." I wondered if I should talk to him about this or not. But I gathered courage and asked him, "Why does your father hit your mother at night?" My husband looked at me in surprise and said, "Are you crazy? That's not true. My father loves my mother a lot." I was about to say something more, but just then he got a call and went to attend it. I realized that he had no idea about this. When he came back, I said, "Maybe I was mistaken. We should go home, it's getting late." 2 days later, my husband left again for work. Before leaving, he gave me some money for shopping and told me to buy clothes of my choice. None of my sisters-in-law ever went with me because no one talked to me properly. I didn't ask my mother-in-law to go with me, fearing my father-in-law might stop her from going. I had become good friends with the housemaids. One of them, Kameli, I asked if she would go to the market with me, and she agreed. I didn't need anyone's permission in this house because no one cared about anyone else. I took Kameli with me, went shopping, and came back home. When I got home, I saw that my mother-in-law's room door was open. I walked slowly towards it and stood near the door. I heard my mother-in-law's voice saying, "Don't put too much pressure on me now." This meant my father-in-law was once again cutting my mother-in-law's hair. And this time it wasn't night but daytime. I peeked through the door, and what I saw made the ground beneath me slip away. My father-in-law was cutting my mother-in-law's hair. I used to think that my father-in-law would beat my mother-in-law, which is why she would scream so much. But I was wrong. He wasn't beating her, he was cutting her hair, and she was screaming loudly. I couldn't understand why he was doing this. After all, a woman's hair is her ornament. My father-in-law had a handful of my mother-in-law's cut hair in one hand and scissors in the other. I couldn't take it anymore and rushed into the room shouting, "Father-in-law, what are you doing?" My father-in-law said, "Be thankful, daughter-in-law, that according to your mother-in-law, this punishment is very mild. Otherwise, she should be thrown out of the house for what she's done." Saying this, he walked out of the room. I hugged my mother-in-law tightly because she was crying a lot. I asked, "What's going on and why did father-in-law cut your hair?" She said, "This is what he does every day." First he hits me and then he cuts my hair. I said, but I think he only cuts your hair and doesn't hit you. My mother-in-law replied, you don't know. He's very cruel. She said, daughter-in-law, I didn't do anything. You don't know anything about this house yet, so you won't understand. I'm innocent. I asked, still, there must be some reason why he's doing this to you. She said, everyone in this house only cares about themselves, so no one speaks up in anyone's matters. Everyone lives off my younger son's earnings, so I keep my distance from them. Your father-in-law is a very dangerous man. Never tell your husband anything, or he'll have me killed. She forced me out of the room and said, don't ever get involved in our fights again, or it won't be good for you. I quietly left her room. I was very sad that this was happening to her. As I was heading to my room, I ran into my father-in-law on the stairs. He called out to me and said, listen to me for a moment. I know you won't believe what I'm about to say. I didn't understand what he meant. He said, I know you're a smart girl just like my son. I said, but you're doing something very wrong to mother. He said, wait, I'll explain everything so you can believe me. He took out his mobile from his pocket and showed me some pictures. He said, look at these. I hope after today you'll never misunderstand me again. I saw the pictures and my vision went dark. I couldn't believe my eyes. Just then my mother-in-law came in, snatched the mobile from my hand, and dragged me out of the room. She said, you're still not in your room? You don't know anything and don't understand anything. Go to your room and don't interfere in our matters again. I quickly pulled my hand away and went to my room. At night, the same screaming noises were coming from their room again. My father-in-law had cut so much of my mother-in-law's hair that she was almost bald. She always covered her head with her sari. Several days passed like this. When my husband was home, the house's atmosphere was great. But when he left, things would get bad again. I wanted to tell my husband everything, but my mother-in-law had forbidden me and said she would have me thrown out of the house if I did. I started feeling very stressed. I couldn't sleep at night. My mother-in-law was my husband's mother and very dear to me because she had never treated me badly. Then one day, my father-in-law started behaving very well with my mother-in-law. I thought maybe he had realized that it was wrong to raise his hand against a woman. I was very happy that for many days, my father-in-law hadn't done anything wrong to her. One night at 9 p.m., I was sitting in my room watching TV. My father-in-law came into my room. Seeing him, I quickly covered my head with my sari. I said, father-in-law, what brings you here? They said, dear, I brought you tea that I made myself. Both you and your husband love my tea. I want you to drink it and tell me how it tastes. I was surprised. I took the cup from their hand and said, thank you, father-in-law. My father-in-law said, no, dear, drink it in front of me. I want to hear your praise. I replied, father-in-law, I just drank 2 or 3 glasses of water, so my stomach is full. I'll drink the tea when it cools down a bit, and then I'll give you the praise you deserve. He smiled and said, oh, I see. He placed his hand on my head and said, stay blessed, I'm leaving now. Be sure to drink the tea. I nodded in agreement. Then I got up, took the cup of tea, went to the bathroom and poured it out. I placed the cup back on the table because I didn't feel like drinking tea at night. Drinking tea at night gives me trouble with digestion. I couldn't tell my father-in-law this, but I was happy to see that he had changed significantly. For quite some time, he had stopped mistreating my mother-in-law. It was late, so I turned off the TV and started chatting with my husband on the phone. He was also resting in his room at the time. But suddenly, I felt as if a shadow was approaching my room. I got scared and quickly turned off my phone, closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. Someone opened the door, glanced at me and then closed the door again. I knew who had come into my room. I resumed chatting with my husband, but I heard some noises outside the room. I put my phone down and quietly went to see what was happening. I saw my father-in-law covering my mother-in-law's mouth and dragging her somewhere. I followed them and was shocked to discover a basement in the house, something I had no idea about. My father-in-law was forcibly dragging my mother-in-law to the basement. I followed them quietly. In the basement, my mother-in-law was tied to a chair with a rope. There were other people there, and my father-in-law was talking to them. What he said next shocked me. He said, All the wealth of your house belongs to your only daughter. I want you to transfer it all to my name. I've been waiting for this day. I'll kill you today and bury you here. Then tell everyone you ran away with your lover. Now, quickly sign these papers so that all of your son's property can be transferred to me." My mother-in-law replied, "I'd rather die than do that. All of this is my daughter's hard-earned money. Do you expect me to give my son's hard-earned money to you and your children? Be thankful I've kept your truth hidden from my son all these years." My father-in-law slapped her hard and said, "I've drugged your daughter-in-law by putting a sedative in her tea. She won't know anything. When she wakes up in the morning, she'll think you ran away with your lover." Actually, the photos my father-in-law had shown me that day were obscene photos of my mother-in-law, edited with other men. Now I'll tell you the whole story. My father-in-law was actually my mother-in-law's second husband. My husband was the son of her first husband. When my mother-in-law got married, she was widowed shortly after. Her first husband had transferred all his property to their child because my mother-in-law was pregnant at the time. She raised her son, educated him, and encouraged him to restart his father's business. Meanwhile, my father-in-law's children were enjoying his wealth. My husband didn't know that his father-in-law was actually his mother's second husband. She had kept this fact hidden from him because her son had been very sensible since childhood. When my husband revived his father's business and made a lot of money, my father-in-law didn't like it. They were living off my husband's earnings, which he had transferred to his mother's name. My father-in-law now wanted to transfer all the property to his name, and had been blackmailing my mother-in-law for some time. He wanted to get her to sign the papers, kill her, and then tell everyone that she had run away with her lover. I couldn't stand to see my mother-in-law being mistreated any longer. While lying in my room chatting with my husband, I devised a plan. I knew my father-in-law had come into the room. I texted my husband the entire situation. I had decided that whether my husband believed me or not, I had sensed something was wrong when my father-in-law's behavior began to change, and he brought me tea for the first time. After reading my messages, my husband replied that he was sending a friend of his to help, and that he was on his way home. He also said that if what I said was true, he would throw his father and all his children out of the house, but if it was false, he would throw me out and divorce me. I told my husband to send his friend, and I agreed to everything. When I reached the door after about 20 minutes of walking down the stairs, I saw that my husband's friend had arrived. He was also a police officer. I had told my husband that his father beat his mother every night and cut her hair. If he didn't believe me, he could come and see for himself. I suspected that the same thing was going to happen tonight. I took my husband's friend down to the basement. He saw with his own eyes that my father-in-law and his sons were beating my mother-in-law and forcing her to sign the papers. They arrested my father-in-law and his two sons and took them to the police station. By morning, my husband had returned home because his friend had called and informed him of everything. The truth was finally revealed to my husband. He filed a case against his father and all his sons. My mother-in-law also testified in court, and the verdict was in our favor. Our brothers-in-law and their wives, who lived in our house, all left. Now we live alone in this big house and are very happy. My husband decided to stay with us and work in this city. Sometimes people stoop so low for wealth that they forget the value of relationships. I urge you to cherish your relationships. If we mistreat those who are with us today, they will misunderstand us and may never look back. So, learn to recognize good people. Treat those who are good with kindness, and try to eliminate the badness in others. My father-in-law apologized to my mother-in-law many times, but perhaps he wasn't worthy of forgiveness because he was about to commit a grave mistake. He was planning to kill my mother-in-law. If I hadn't been there at the right time, he might have buried her in this very house. Friends, I hope you liked our story. If you enjoyed it, please like the video. If you're new to the channel, subscribe and press the notification bell so that you get the next update first.